session of the Huddle 2019 is the inaugural address titled Future of India-Sri Lanka Ties. For this, I'd like to invite on stage Honorable Mahinda Rajapaksa, the leader of opposition Sri Lanka. And to be in conversation with him, I'd like to invite Mr. N. Ram, Chairman, the Hindu Group Publishing Pvt Ltd. Ladies and gentlemen, Future of India-Sri Lanka Ties.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, let me begin by thanking the organizers, the Hindu publication, for inviting me to be part of this prestigious event. I believe that sharing ideas and learning from one another is a key to our understanding one another better, which is why forums like this can assist in exploring new opportunities, pathways, and brighter possibilities for cooperation. I would like to also take this opportunity to particularly extend my warm greetings to my friend of many decades who is present here today, Sri Ram, whose friendship and insights over the years I have greatly valued. I am indeed happy to be amongst you to share a few thoughts on the future direction of India-Sri Lanka relations. Many academics, politicians, students, bureaucrats, and perhaps other groups of people who studied, spoken and deliberated on this subject in the past. And I believe this. No matter at which point in history we consider it as a topic of utmost importance to both our states and people. Often I have said, India is our relation, and the bonds between us are unique. We are neighbors, bound by ties of geographical proximity, of a shared history, and a shared system of values and culture. We are one family. And as with any family, the journey is not always smooth or trouble-free. I don't intend focusing on these ups and downs of our relationship, but would venture to say that though an active dialogue, any misunderstandings and could be averted, as has been demonstrated in our recent dealings with each other. If we delve into the past of our friendly relationship, we could see followed by invaders from India as much as extremely fruitful and seminal visits by religious leaders. The three celebrated visits of the Buddha were landmark and unique milestone in the history of Sri Lanka. The later visits by Arhat Mahinda and his sister, Theri Shangamita, have left indelible mark in our culture and way of life. In fashioning our future relationship, these are strengths must be examined and understood. In much later times, the influence of Mahatma Gandhi on our national thought processes. Two, should be taken into reckoning when our relationship is fashioned and molded. I see that in all this on the part of India. There was an act of giving something, and Sri Lanka was the recipient. Buddhism was the endowment that we cherish most. The bilateral relations have not always been what it should be. There have been good times as well as not so good times in our relations. Nevertheless, it is important for both Sri Lankans and Indians to understand the trends that would shape relations between both our countries, and also to explore how best we could nurture the relationship that could mutually benefit us. However, though it all, both states have always respected and stayed true to the non-aligned movements, principles of sovereignty, non-aggression, non-interference, mutual benefit, and peaceful coexistence. I can talk to you today about dark times past, when both our nations experienced the threat and terror that comes from a few who irresponsibly use innocent lives to fulfill their own selfish objectives, a thirst for power and violence that claimed the lives of leaders from both our nations. But all of you present here know the history of our relations. You know about how strained ties were in the 1980s, when the liberation tigers of Tamil, who found safe haven in India, assassinated Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi, and were the cause behind the death of over 1,500 Indian soldiers. The 1980s was undoubtedly the most troubled period in our bilateral relationship. And even though all of us in this room know this past, it is important to briefly recall the journey along with the mistakes we have made in order to ensure we learn from them and move towards a future that is not riddled with incidents that could have been or should have been avoided. If we are to delve a little into the history of our 7 decades-long political relationship, we see that there are 2 major breakdowns in our bilateral relationship. In the 1980s and in 2014, which have had serious consequences for both nations. Just before we entered the decade of 1980s, the good relations between India and Sri Lanka had reached new heights. A period of excellence in bilateral relations between India and Sri Lanka was the 1970s, when Mrs. Indira Gandhi was in power in India and Mrs. Sirima Bandaranaike in Sri Lanka. Both leaders were women. Their respective political parties shared much the same ideology, and foreign policy and personal friendship were established between their families. This spilled over the President Jaya Javanan's time, and he too maintained excellent relations with the Janata Party government that was elected to power in India in 1977. In fact, while visiting Sri Lanka in February 1979, addressing the Parliament, Prime Minister Morarji Desai stated that the problems that were inherited from the colonial past of both countries have been resolved through goodwill and negotiations. He also stated that both nations now stood on the threshold of a new era of cooperation. History has also shown us that there is no need for similarities in ideology or foreign policy between the parties ruling India and Sri Lanka to share a good working relationship. Post-independence, the new government of Sri Lanka was right-wing and pro-Western, while the government of India, led by Jawaharlal Nehru, was more socialist, centrist, and non-aligned. Yet the relationship between India and Sri Lanka during Prime Minister Nehru's year was extremely good. In fact, when the newly independent Sri Lanka wanted to obtain membership of the United Nations, the Soviet Union vetoed our application because they did not believe that Ceylon was really an independent nation. As a dutiful neighbor, Nehru got his ambassadors in Moscow and in the UN to lobby on our behalf and to convince the USSR of Ceylon's actual political and constitutional status as an independent nation. So that we can't forget all that. Since the 1980s, the relationship between our two countries remained very frequent. But in 2005, when I was elected president, I made it a point to establish a good working relationship with India. You would recollect that a novel mechanism was in place during our time in government, and particularly when we as a country fought against the most cruel terrorist organization in the world, the Troika, as it was known, helped in no small measures to build a bridge between the leadership and the associated thought processes of our two countries, and thus prevent any misunderstandings when Sri Lanka was engaged in a crucial war against terrorism. It was the friendly and casual nature of the relationship between the two groups that formed the Troika that produced the desired outcome. I say without any hesitation that India's deep understanding of our government's motive was a key factor that helped us to eradicate terrorism. The respective leadership were consistently and continuously briefed by the relevant Troika, thus promoting the high level of understanding that was required to keep the relationship dynamic. In 2014, the second major breakdown of bilateral relationships took place. The government that had ruled India for a decade was voted out in 2014. Unfortunately, the working relationship that existed between my government and the outgoing government of India did not roll over the new government of India formed in 2014. Lack of communication between both parties seems to have led to this situation. The communication is such a vital factor that can be the make or break in strengthening our country's relationship. Therefore, an open line of healthy and constant communication should always be the focus even in the coming years. Because we know now the hindsight that the misunderstandings of the 1980s as well as that of 2014 were aberrations that could easily have been avoided. It is key that India and Sri Lanka evolve a mechanism to prevent these misunderstandings from taking place. Despite the snag of 2014, the opposition coalition that I lead now has a good understanding with the ruling party in India. In their dealings with Sri Lanka, my suggestion to India is that the rule of thumb with regard to India-Sri Lanka relations should be that if the outgoing party had an advocate working relationship with Sri Lanka, the incoming party should give due recognition to the fact and continue the relationship on that basis. The past experience has shown that the danger of disruption in our bilateral relationship arises in the immediate affirmation of changes of government. Such easily avoided disruptions have had serious consequences for both countries. I hope my discussions of history has not been too boring for you. But it is important to recall, to understand what we have done right over the years and ensure we correct where we went wrong. Now, in reflecting on the future of India and Sri Lanka relations, it is useful to identify the main elements having been on the relationship and focus on how we can better that relationship. The traditional government-to-government dealings alone cannot give shape to our future relations because the world is becoming more complex by the day. However, political leaders would continue to play the most coveted role as they determine the policies, be it foreign, economic, security, and a host of other policies that would pin on our bilateral relations. Tangibles like these are easier to monitor and even control, but intangibles pose grave threats. Political leaders and other social leaders must always keep a tab on the intangibles. For instance, a wrong word from a leader would sour the relations, as we have witnessed in the past. You know it personally, what happened in that. It would not be out of place for me to state upfront that a strong mechanism at the country-to-country level, fully endorsed and supported by each of our governments, should be in place to clear any misunderstandings that may crop up from time to time. The Troika system should have been a forum that we continued, and perhaps there is still opportunity to bring it back from 2020. Of course, 2020, there is an election. It is a truism that the world has become smaller due to modern methods of transport and communication. In a relationship between two parties, and in this case, between two countries, inevitably there are the third parties involved in the determining how the relationship would be. These third parties will play an important role in influencing our relationship. Therefore, we need to look at not only ourselves, but others as well, but to determine what our future would be. In the case of our two countries, there are those geographical near as well as far. To what extent these entities can influence us must be born in the minds of the leaders. Whatever the influence is, as long as the two countries in the relationship clearly understand the foundation on which it is built, nothing could be done to jeopardize the relationship. In today's world, therefore, bilateral relations cannot be narrowly envisioned. Future bilateral relations would be influenced by many other factors, among which national security, political stability, economic and social well-being, modern communication, technology, climate, international transport would play key roles. For Sri Lanka and India, national security is vital. In future, it would be crucially important given the destructive forces that operate now and also those that would spring up in the future. It is natural for countries like us, which are so closely bound together, to be sensitive to our national security issues. Of course, national security is not just focusing on military strength or any other related ability. It is my understanding that national security composes many aspects that would impact on the well-being of a nation. The issue of national security needs to be understood in the right perspective. Regional terrorism influenced by international terrorism will greatly affect how we, Sri Lanka and India, look at each other. Since we are geographically in very close proximity, we have a mutual obligation to ensure the security of each other. Often we have heard the Indian leaders emphasizing the need for Sri Lanka to ensure that the Sri Lankan soil is not used by any third party that would pose a threat to India. Similarly, we too would want India to ensure that any threat from any groups operating within Indian soil does not pose a threat to Sri Lanka. Interestingly, in recent times, maritime security in the Indian Ocean has become an important issue in regard to respective national security of our two countries. In future bilateral relations, Indian Ocean maritime security too would be an important aspect in foregoing a well-founded strategy. In all these, I strongly believe that a vibrant, ongoing dialogue between the two countries would ensure each other's national security. This dialogue, as I have emphasized earlier, should transcend the normal diplomatic boundaries, and there are experiences such as the Troika that we could draw from. Though the Troika, we can go further to create forms and collaboration that take into the consideration the pressing social, economic, and cultural issues that affect our peoples, and elaborate on the best practices and advance that we could learn from one another. The formulation of such an entity is foremost in my party's plan for the future. When addressing political stability, as we have seen in the recent past, this is one of the most crucial factors that would determine the character of our future relations. If any of our two countries has political turmoil and instability, foreign relations would be put on the back burner. A strong government and a political stability would always facilitate the blossoming of bilateral relations, the future bilateral relations between our two countries. Strong political leadership would be a key factor to a vibrant bilateral relationship. As much as a political stability on either side would influence the strength and quality of our future relationship. Our economic stability too would be a key influential factor for future relations. Economic stability encompasses many subjects, and majority of these subjects, such as food security of each of our two countries, would influence to what extent our bilateral relations would prosper. An important facet of economic stability is how we look at our national assets. No country, in my understanding, can achieve economic stability by disposing of national assets. I would emphasize that the policy advocating sale of national assets inevitably generate tensions among our people. And this has a negative effect on our relations with the country acquiring these assets, whatever that country may be. This has been our stark experience in the recent past. This does not, however, mean we should not explore joint initiatives for mutual benefits. An example is the disposable income of our people. Sri Lankan would choose as his first choice of international travel India. This is certainly true for many Buddhists, but the money he can put aside for international travel matters. It is when people travel from one to the other, that they would understand the mindsets and even go on to form personal relations. This may seem to be an insufficient detail, but all these matters when we speak of bilateral relations. Today, the whole world, even remote communities, use modern communication technology. Bilateral relations too would be greatly influenced depending on to what extent countries have advanced in the field of information and communication technology. Both our countries have large rural communities, and ICTs would greatly facilitate these communities to become prosperous and productive, and thereby enhance their quality of life. During our time in government, we made huge strides to take the ICTs to the most remote communities and enable them to use such technologies in their day-to-day life. Cheap telephone rates and affordable internet use will undoubtedly promote connectivity between communities in each of our countries. I'm a strong believer in fostering people-to-people relations. It goes without saying that when that travel between our two countries must be made much easier. Sri Lankan Airlines has the largest number of flights into the Indian cities. The government of India has taken vigorous initiatives to assist pilgrimage pilgrims from Sri Lanka to every way, in every way. Border control measures should be in place, but with a friendly face. In this context, partnership, collaborations, and similar relationship matter very much. We need much stronger relationship between similar groups such as academia, business leaders, social, cultural, and religious community, research groups and think tanks, and our respective bureaucracies. Formal links between our respective foreign ministries alone would not be sufficient. This is why forums such as this is very important in bridging that gap. Exactly how this relationship will evolve, we cannot foretell. But the foundation of our relationship is certainly too strong to be shaken by passing tempers. We need to harness the quality of our human resources and our rapidly improving technology in our mutual interest. We have the institutional mechanism for this purpose, and the will of our leaders will serve as the dominant factor in strengthening our relationship further. We are now in that critical period, and I cannot stress enough on the importance of having a strong leaders at both ends with the will to move progressively in the right direction, particularly with this being an election year in both India and Sri Lanka, in Sri Lanka too. As in any key partnership, the strength or the weaknesses of the past relations would determine how strong or weak the future relations would be, strong or weak. Here, Sri Lankan and India stand tall because of our bonds that run into thousands of years. Our two countries are so bound to each other and innumerable ways. The culture of the Indian subcontinent is unique, and that alone should provide us with the platform on which we should build and nurture our relationship. We are two nations that have a remarkable range of depths in our relationship that, my friends, should never be forgotten in fashion of future cooperation. I believe it is now time for me to conclude. Let me therefore express my warm thanks to the Hindu newspaper for your kind invitation to participate in this prestigious event. I have greatly enjoyed my interaction with you, and I wish your event all success. May the Noble Triple Gem bless you all. Terwan Sarnai.
Gentlemen, we've had a comprehensive overview of bilateral relations, but going beyond just certain aspects of bilateral relations, some important thinking, new ideas on how to build upon the strengths and overcome the weaknesses and mistakes made in the past. And these ideas, this thinking, new thinking, comes from a statesman who's got tremendous political experience and experience in governance. For about 40 years as a parliamentarian, 40. Yes, in 1970, he was, at that time, the youngest elected parliamentarian. He's no longer the youngest, he told me. Somebody else so now. Twice, 2 terms as president of Sri Lanka at a critical time. Twice prime minister. He adds a second time for 3 weeks. And leader of the opposition. Everyone in India knows him, but I think this is an important, thoughtful and thought-provoking speech. And I had some questions which have already been answered in what Mr. Rajapaksa has given us today. But I'll still ask a couple of questions, if I may. When you've reiterated in a more elaborate way the message you took to Delhi when you visited us in September this year, when you spoke about the need to overcome you in fact said the misunderstandings belong to the past. Then you also spoke about a new mechanism for communication, two-way communication at the top.
And the officials.
And at the official level. So that I think has already been dealt with in the inaugural lecture. If you were to return to power, as seems very possible, thank you. I use the word carefully, very possible. You are confident that what you put forward here can actually be implemented despite whatever obstacles remain in both countries?
I think so. Because if we have 2 strong leaders, as I said,
yes,
then we can.
Turning to the, excuse me, I almost lost my voice and I told Mr. Rajapaksa that, and we have an Irish backstop, an insurance scheme as in Brexit, in case it completely fails. This is about the changes that have taken place over the decades in India's relationship with Sri Lanka. And as I see it, as many of us see it, from being an active arbiter of one of your major national questions, the Tamil question, after the IPKF returned, India, the policy changed. Whoever was in government more or less adopted the same policy as a development and strategic partner. What, in your close observation, how has this change affected the perceptions among the Tamil community and also among the Sinhalese? That is, this change from wanting to be actively involved.
No, I think the Tamil community opposed the IPKF. I mean, they are the first people to oppose. Then the majority community started.
Can you hear them?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Is he audible? Yes, thank you.
I think, as I said earlier, the Tamil community is the one that opposed the IPKF first, because they faced the problem.
Yeah.
So, with the Sinhalese, the majority community and the Muslims, also against the IPKF coming in and getting involved in our country. So, after they left, I think it was unfortunately we internationalized the issue. We should have settled between us. We can do that. We have the capabilities, we can do it with a better understanding.
That's the next question. It's 10 years since the Civil War ended. While you are crediting with ending decades of violence, no question about it, and building crucial infrastructure in the years soon after, there's still some tasks that remain to be done. And that seems to be to satisfy the Tamil community, in particular the political leaders who want devolution of power. What is your current thinking on it?
No, the people can be satisfied, but not the politicians. My problem is that.
But you will devote some time.
Yes, we are certainly resolve that problem.
As leader of the opposition and as a possible leader in power again.
Yes, thank you.
You referred to, I didn't raise it, but you referred to your 3 weeks, second term as Prime Minister.
It was 3 weeks, not 50, exactly 52 days.
So when you accepted President Maithripala Sirisena's offer and assumed charge as Prime Minister in October 2018, the perception here was there was not much in it for you or your party. It was a bit intriguing why you would accept it at this stage.
At that
you
stage,
want to give us an insight into that thinking.
But I don't want to say that. But as you asked me, we managed to break the two-third majority in the government. And the marriage that my party and the UNP, the ruling party.
And you think that's a good thing?
I think so.
The new constitution under process is a non-starter, is it?
No, it was a fast, for the last 4 years, they never introduced it. The election year, they want to take the votes. That was a political way.
You have been one of the pillars of the SLFP. Your father was one of the founding members, along with SWRD Bandaranaike, of this party. And you stood by them throughout, even under very difficult circumstances. And there was a new constitution, and President Jayawardena seemed all-powerful at that stage. But now you are the leader of another party, but you told me yesterday that you're not a member. Could you explain the nuance?
The president of the new party is here in front of me, Mr. Professor G.L. Piris. And he says that I am the leader.
So he's a leader without being a member of the party. I think much of the media didn't know that. He's not a member. He's not a card-carrying member of the party that he leads.
I'm a card-holding member of the SLFP yet.
He's a card-holding member of the SLFP up to this date. But the president of the SLFP is the president of Sri Lanka. Is that a convention that can't be changed? That if you become president, you automatically...
You can.
You can. Finally, Sri Lanka, despite being small, seems to have several major advantages, strategic advantages, because of your location, geopolitical location, your political reserves, high level of literacy and education, high levels of social development, economic prospects, and improving bilateral ties with neighbors. So, what is your goal? Have you fixed anything about what the income should be, or are you working on it for the next 20 years?
We have, if you notice that within the last 4 years it has deteriorated. But in my time, it was increasing. We had development in the country. The port was built, new port was built in Hambantota. That is the key factor in developing that area. The airport, then the highways, the high-rise building, the hotels came up. So the country economy was moving forward, but unfortunately it has come down again. Now we want to develop it back. So for that, I think India is very important and the people.
And finally, would you like to give the Hindu and this audience a scoop about the coming presidential election? Or
unfortunately, I can't contest because so I have to find a good candidate.
So thank you very much.
My candidate will win, whoever I put.
You are confident?
I'm confident.
Whoever is fielded against you.
Yes. That is certain.
You're not thinking of amending the constitution later?
I will do that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Mahinda Rajapaksa and Mr. N. Ram. I'd like to request Mr. N. Ram to present a memento to Honorable Mahinda Rajapaksa. Sir, please, can we have your back? I'd like Mr. N. Ram to present this memento to Honorable Mahinda Rajapaksa. Thank you very much. Our memento this year, 100 Memories, One Book, has been exclusively crafted for the Huddle and is a storehouse of 100 photographs from the archives of the Hindu. For those active on social media, before we begin the next session, please follow the Huddle on Facebook at The Huddle 2019. Our Twitter handle is The Huddle, and we are on Instagram at Huddle_the.